fall into the curse in the Smile franchise. After the horrifying events of the first movie, the saga continues, and the entity has found new victims in Smile 2. From the looks of it, the series is all set to continue as the entity is still at large. But what's the true nature of this supernatural entity? Is it a demonic being, or simply a manifestation of one's trauma bonded with a paranormal force? In this video, we'll dive into the depths of the nightmarish entity in the Smile franchise, and also elaborate on its unique anatomy. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. What is the Smile entity, and what does it seek in the mortal realm? The exact nature of the entity has not been specified in the movie, but it seems to be a demonic creature of sorts that preys on hapless victims in the mortal realm. This entity feeds off physical trauma and enjoys the pain of its victims. The curse of the Smile affects an individual immediately after they witness someone killing themselves, after the entity drives them to the brink of insanity. The witness is then subject to the same kind of torture and hallucinations, and the entity eventually leads him or her to certain death. There's a theory that suggests that the entity collects the souls of its victims and keeps growing stronger with each new target. It's called the Smile curse because an eerie smile can be seen on the faces of the victims in their final moments, as they kill themselves in the most graphic and violent ways. A smile is a conventional way to deal with pain, and the entity's methods serve as an allegory to deal with trauma, or as a lesson for what happens when one doesn't. How long has the Smile entity been preying on people? How did the entity originate? Although it hasn't been clearly indicated in the franchise how the mysterious entity that takes over its victims originated, there are some hints that point to a certain timeline. For instance, it's mentioned that the entity has taken over 19 other people before the events of the first film. At least, these are the known numbers, and given how the victim is usually mentally tortured and subjected to hell before being forced to kill themselves in a matter of days, the entity has been around fairly recently. Of course, there's always a chance that the entity has existed for years, and the records of its previous victims are just missing. The origin of the entity is shrouded in mystery, but there are a few theories around it that make a lot of sense. Since it's almost confirmed that the entity is demonic in nature, it was probably summoned from the depths of hell. Some tortured individual might have summoned the demonic entity through certain rituals, and the motive may have been some kind of revenge. As a result, the entity got stuck in the mortal realm and kept spreading the curse from one victim to another. Given the sadistic nature of the entity, it's quite likely that it enjoys torturing its victims and leading them to gruesome deaths. Another probable origin story of the entity might be related to the dark side of human psychology. There's a chance that it feeds on trauma and psychological issues because it was born from there, and the entity might be more of a consciousness attached to the darkness associated with humanity. It latches on to any similar trace of darkness, and the curse is the easy mode of infecting new individuals to continue the chain reaction. This does take away the supernatural element to some extent, but it's still a force that cannot be explained using rational terms.
How do we stop it?
We need to kill you first.
What?
How can one skip the curse? Once someone is subjected to the curse of the Smile entity, there's no easy way out. That being said, there have been a couple instances where an individual managed to skip over the curse using a clever tactic. Robert Talley killed a stranger before a witness, and this allowed him to pass the curse onto the witness. It was almost like the entity was drawn to the witness, but that didn't spare Robert completely, because it got him a life sentence for murder. It was revealed that Robert learned about this method from another person who survived using a similar method. This was a Brazilian man who killed his neighbor in front of the neighbor's wife, and the demonic entity passed on to her. However, so far in the Smile franchise, there hasn't been a way to get rid of the demonic entity completely. Even the two individuals who managed to transfer the curse suffered jail time as a consequence, and lived the rest of their lives in constant fear. Is there another way to outsmart the impact of the curse? Once someone is infected by the curse, it's almost game over for the individual, and it means inevitable death after a point of time. Killing someone in front of a witness in order to escape the curse in exchange for jail time is not a sustainable solution. But there is one that can probably work. What if the victim subjects him or herself to complete social isolation? This is easier said than done, but if executed properly, this can be quite effective. It would be just the individual and the demon till the end of eternity, but it can successfully break the chain, even if the entity kills the individual, there would be no next victim to latch onto, and it's assumed that the entity wouldn't survive without a host. Of course, the biggest challenge to this is the manipulative nature of the entity, and it will try its best to convince the individual into finding someone. Another way to outsmart the curse could be to subject the victim into a medically induced coma for a very long time. He or she would still be alive, but there would be no way for the entity to torment them, unless it does so in their subconscious. We're of the opinion that if the future of the franchise throws up certain options to evade the curse, it will probably come at the cost of someone sacrificing themselves for the greater good. Transform into any individual at will. This adds to the deception that the entity can create, and we've seen it disguised as multiple individuals across 2 movies. It can maintain the facade of the fake appearance for as long as is required, and the main motive is mostly to enjoy the shock and horror in the victim. Also, the shape-shifting ability helps the victim stay clear of any real help, and allows the entity to manipulate them just as it wants. When the entity shapeshifts, it can also mimic the voice of the person it is posing as, but there have been times when the entity posed as someone and used a demonic form of them to torment the victim. For instance, at the end of the first movie, it appeared before Rose as a demonic version of her mother, and in Smile 2, it appeared as Sky's own demonic version in the climactic moments. What is the real appearance of the entity? It is extremely difficult to figure out the true appearance of the Smile entity, since it's so good at shapeshifting. However, there have been a couple of moments in both Smile and Smile 2 that have given us a glimpse of the original appearance of the malevolent force. As it turns out, the actual form of the demon is stuff that makes up nightmares, and even looking at it for a prolonged period of time can drive someone to insanity. The entity has a tall, red humanoid figure, and there are several smiling mouths packed into one to give it a grotesque feeling. Also, the beady round eyes and lanky thin arms add to its terrifying presence, as does the skinless appearance, which makes it look like a flayed corpse. It seems to be much larger than a regular human, and stands at roughly 5 meters, but there's a chance that it can change its shape at will, so the true size of the entity will remain a mystery. The true appearance of the entity is only visible to the one affected by the curse, which is why we see Rose experiencing the morbid being at the end of Smile, and Sky witnessing similar horror in the final scene of Smile 2. Can the entity possess a strong-willed individual with a clear conscience? As we've already discussed, the supernatural force in the Smile franchise tends to prey upon those who have some serious psychological issues or past trauma. Even those who are on the wrong side of the law and have indulged in criminal practices can be easy victims because their conscience is damaged. In Smile 2, we see something similar in the drug dealer Lewis, who becomes an easy target for the entity. Even in the first movie, the victims of the Smile entity were those with a troubled past. The protagonist of Smile was a psychiatrist named Rose Cotter, who had a traumatic childhood experience where her mother passed away in front of her from a drug overdose. Now, we can't help but wonder if people who actually have no such trauma, or the ones who are extremely strong-willed, can also be manipulated by the entity. The thing about the curse is that the entity does manipulate its next victim to some extent, but it cannot really choose the next one to fall under the curse. Thus, there might be circumstances where someone quite normal and strong-willed can also be sucked into the fatal grip of the entity. The cop who helped Rose in the first movie, and yet, the entity didn't spare him in the sequel. Also, it's impossible for a regular person to have no psychological issues whatsoever, because everyone carries their emotional baggage to some extent. Thus, the idea of a perfect person who can deter the entity is quite utopian, and we haven't seen anything like it yet. Has the entity evolved into a more powerful being in Smile 2? The malevolent Smile entity, also referred to as the Smiler by many, has grown significantly more savage and deadlier in the recently released sequel, and the director Parker Finn has also confirmed the same in an interview. Similar to the events of the first film, the Smiler finds itself a new target in the form of a popular pop star, and there are several moments in Smile 2 that hint towards a stronger entity. Some of the methods of deception used to mentally torment Sky, the protagonist of Smile 2, are truly harrowing, and it's safe to say that she has it worse than her predecessor, Rose, even though they eventually meet the same fate. For starters, Sky is a lot more troubled than Rose, and this helped the entity grow stronger while it latched onto her because it feeds off people's trauma. Rose's trauma was way back in her childhood, and Sky's tragic loss of her partner was very recent. She also involved herself with substance abuse, unlike Rose, who stayed clear of pills. The director also admitted that he wanted new ways to scare the viewers, and this meant that he had to think outside of the box when it came to the entity. Also, if you go by theory of the entity, growing stronger with each soul that it collects along the way, it makes sense that it would be more powerful than the first movie because there have been quite a few victims along the way. If there's a Smile 3, which is quite likely to happen in the near future, we will probably get to see an even more powerful version of the Smiler. What is the personality of the Smile entity like? As a malevolent demonic entity, the Smiler has a personality that fits the most evil thing that you can imagine. It's absolutely ruthless, cruel, and sadistic, and it derives great pleasure in psychologically damaging its victims. It can probably kill the victims within a couple of days, but it extends the run simply for the fun of driving them to the brink of insanity before making them kill themselves in the most gruesome manner. The entity is also quite cunning and intelligent, and there have been times when we've seen how deceitful it can be. The scene where the entity presented itself as Rose's therapist was a shocking moment, and there's a similar moment in Smile 2 when it deceives Skye by posing as her best friend and misleading her. The conniving nature of the entity helps it in dragging the victims further into the depths of its sinister plans. Can the Smile entity infect multiple individuals? The end of Smile 2 has kept people guessing about the nature of the entity, and much of it is because of how the witness to the last victim killing itself is an entire gallery of viewers. The concert is about to kick off when Skye kills herself on stage, and the horrified fans can all become the next victims of the entity. If that's the way ahead for Smile 3, we're looking at a much larger impact, and it's no longer about moving on from one victim to another. If the thousands of fans present there are infected, so will be several others watching live on TV, and it will start a chain reaction that will eventually consume just about everyone. Unless, of course, someone is quick enough to come up with a plan to get rid of the entity once and for all. What can be done to banish the entity back to its realm? Can it be killed or destroyed? If this is indeed a demonic entity, it's a fair assumption that it came from some hellish realm, and there can be no easy way to kill it permanently. There have been a few innovative theories around this, and one of them was there for us to see in Smile 2, as there is a plan to deprive the entity of a host. It's believed that the Smile entity cannot survive without a host to prey upon, and if a death can be faked, then it can be lured out and cast aside. Of course, it doesn't work at all in the movie, but it's still a plan that can be attempted later. The origin of the entity might also hold the key to its possible banishment. If the entity was indeed summoned using certain rituals, the same can be done to push it back into the realm where it belongs. Also, there might be a chance to weaken the entity if one of its victims ends up being a morally correct, strong-willed, and stable individual who doesn't offer any scope for the entity to feed on his or her insecurities and fears. The right methods of exorcism by someone powerful enough to counter the entity might also prove to be fruitful, but this is a little too far-fetched because we haven't seen anything like this in the first two movies yet. Marvelous Verdict, a worthy horror antagonist to fear. After decades of entertainment, courtesy of the likes of Freddy Krueger, Jason, and many more, there has been a scarcity in the recent past. The recent advent of Art the Clown and the Smile entity are quite promising in this regard, because they can potentially end up spawning long-running franchises. The Smiler has all the ingredients to turn into the perfect horror antagonist, and we would love more on its origins in the next movie. Now, all it needs is a worthy competitor, because no one has posed a challenge before the entity's sinister force. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone!